So welcome to the Public Accountability Board. This is the January meeting. Just to remind you of the kind of ground rules that this is being recorded. It will be uploaded to our website. So if you don't want that to happen to you, then you should not look away now, but get away now as quickly as you possibly can. I won't go through the whole list of who's here today and who we're expecting, but just to mention some, as we usually do, we welcome local councillors, Councillor Gary Weatherall, Councillor Peter Short, Gary from Sheffield, Peter from Rotherham. We welcome members of the press. I think Danielle Andrews is joining us from the Star, and another Danielle Ho from Yorkshire Live, if not someone representing them. Police and Crime Panel, we've got Alan Carter joining us. I'm not sure if he's on the line at the moment. And then from the panels, the chair of the Joint Independent Audit Committee, and we should have Anne McCaskill at some point. I also welcome Tom Bright, who is on the call. I see his name. He's on the detective, do you call it fast track course? But he's come to get educated, and we welcome him, and that's a very good. And then we've had some apologies from Lauren Poultney, ACC Poultney, ACC David Hartley, and the Deputy Mark Roberts, who all have very good and very valid reasons for not being here today. So going on through the agenda fairly quickly then, we've done number 1, welcome and apologies. Item 2, about video conferencing and recording. Item 3, announcements. Certainly one announcement we should make is to extend our congratulations to the Deputy Constable Mark Roberts, who was who's awarded the Queen's Police Medal in the New Year Honours. So that's really good, really well deserved, and reflects well on South Yorkshire Police. So congratulations to Mark. Are there any other announcements? So moving on to public questions. Sally, this is for you. I don't think there are any public questions.
There are no, Alan.
Urgent items. We normally ask David Hartley or the Chief Constable or someone from the force just to update us briefly on where we're at in terms of the coronavirus, the impact that's having on the force, and questions of enforcement and so on. So, Chief, I don't know whether you're going to field that.
Yes, I will, and forgive me, I seem to be having some difficulty getting my camera to operate, so I shall persevere, but can you hear me?
We can hear you very clearly.
Right, okay.
We can't see you at all. It's a bit like mist over Morecambe Bay.
Let me persevere, but in the meantime I shall carry on. So, essentially, of course, it's not lost on any of us that the dread pandemic gets worse, remains with us. New restrictions in the latest lockdown. Those restrictions obviously have to be enforced as appropriate. The broad approach that we have taken throughout these difficult times remains the same. And just to remind participants that has always surrounded the so-called 4Es approach, which is to describe a scenario whereby initially we would seek to encourage, educate, and the like before moving to enforcement. All that we've suggested would be different, perhaps, is that given that we're so long into this now, we're likely to skip through sort of encouraging and educating and the like a little more quickly than we might have done and get to enforcement more readily. But our approach is still to be proportionate, sensible, reasonable. Where there are egregious breaches of the regulations, such as to put people in danger, obviously we will take action. We have taken significant action in respect to people arranging for illegal sort of music events. large parties, that sort of thing. You know, the public would expect us to take action, and so we have. And we have, of course, in respect of a significant number of individuals as well. So that is ongoing. But what I would say, in just capping off that thought, for the most part, we still do see levels of enforcement that are a tiny, tiny fraction of the number of people resident in our county. And, you know, it's important to thank people for their forbearance. It is absolutely understood that people are thoroughly fed up with the current scenario. We understand that. And I would remind people that, of course, our officers are drawn from the communities that we serve. So they too understand what it is to have your children at home and for people to be, you know, put upon by restrictions that we all regret. So for the most part, people, I think, are being very good and very positive, and it's that spirit with which we continue to engage with the public. And the last point is just to talk to the resilience of the force. Of course, it's really important that our people remain fit and healthy, such as to look after everybody else. The good news from our perspective is that our abstraction rates are still manageable. It will not come as a shock to anybody to understand that within, you know, an organisation of well over 5,000 people, it also happens that we have issues with people either testing positive for COVID or isolating in line with the regs and what have you. But for us, it's no more than the seasonal sort of average at the moment. Happily, most of our people are young, fit, and seem to be working quite well through all of this. So long may that continue. We are a bit nervous, frankly, about the new variant because that seems to have a higher level of transmissibility, and there is a potential that more people could succumb to the virus than has been the case hitherto. But we have got good controls in place inside the organisation to try and cater for that. And at this point in time, we continue happily to retain the capacity to do all that is required to sustain full spectrum policing, and that is what we continue to do.
Thank you. And as far as I can tell from my position and people in my office, it looks as if the public are still behind the force, have confidence in the force, and I'm sure that will remain as long as, well, confidence in the force is always contingent on confidence in the government and what the government is asking us to do. So as long as the messaging from them is clear and understood and accepted by the public, then they will accept what South Yorkshire Police have to do in terms of enforcement, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
So thank you very much for that update. Moving on to item 6, are there any items to be considered in the absence of the public and the press? I don't think there are, Sally.
No, there aren't.
And declarations of interest, are there any other than what we already know?
No.
No. So moving to item 8 then, which is the minutes of the PAB held on the 10th of December, pages 1 to 10. Anything arising from, not arising from, are those minutes accurate as far as everyone can tell? Those who are here, can we accept those as a true record then of what happened? And coming then to the actions arising from that, this is item 9, and on page 11, there's just the one around the public space protection order. Now, Tim, is there anything more to report? Or Michelle, for that matter?
No, I can carry on. Sorry, I was just trying to find the mute switch. Yes, Commissioner, so myself and the Deputy Chief Constable met with officers from Sheffield City Council on Friday to discuss the same. And really just to impress upon colleagues from City Council, you know, we genuinely believe that a PSPO, whilst on its own, is not the solution to some of the long ongoing issues in PHO. We do genuinely believe that it will give us the necessary enforcement powers to actually take the issues forward. Clearly, there's a need for a long-term strategic plan. The you have seen in the press, and all the public have seen in the press, the recent establishment of a dedicated neighbourhood policing team for Page Hall. The council have very recently appointed a new neighbourhood manager who will be working very, very closely with our neighbourhood teams. And colleagues from the council have agreed to go away and have a look at the implications of the PSPO. So we'll be waiting to hear back from Sheffield City Council to give us an indication as to how they would like to proceed with that. But we have had a productive meeting last Friday, myself and the Deputy Chief Constable.
Good, so some progress there. Can I ask Tim, the house in Page Hall, is that a council-owned property?
Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you, Commissioner. I think it may be, but I'm not certain.
And is it just the police who use it, or are council officers in there?
At the moment, it's the policing base down there, but absolutely we are open to offers. Certainly the complexity of the issues down there, I think, can only be solved by different agencies working together at a tactical level. So we're happy to, co-locate with people, happy certainly to work in partnership with all the agencies to bring some form of resolution to some of the long-standing issues in Page Hall.
Yeah, I guess coronavirus have complications now to that, but yeah, to the sharing of property. Yeah.
Absolutely, but the issues in Page Hall have been there a lot longer than coronavirus, and they'll be here a lot longer than after coronavirus.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much for the update. So going now in the agenda to forced performance and item 10. As you know, we go around the districts by turn, and this time it's the Sheffield district. So we have a report from Shelley Helmsley, who's the district commander in Sheffield. Shelley, I know you're there, and you may want to reveal yourself, because we know that works. We did it earlier. So I'll see if you pop up on the screen. And while you're doing that, perhaps I can say, and I hope this doesn't sound patronising, it probably will, but it's not meant to sound patronising. I found this a very readable report, a really good report, and in the spirit of what we're trying these reports to look like. So I think we've had a couple of months now where we've had very readable, the sort of report that the members of the public could get into quite easily, jargon-free, good narrative, strong narrative, very clear what's being said. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for particularly highlighting some of those aspects of I mean, you could talk forever about crime across the piece, but there were some particular things that I said, could you highlight them? And you've done that, so thank you very much for that. So what I'll do, Shelley, if this is all right, I won't ask you to go through the report, but I will take you to some pages in the report and ask questions on that. But if you feel there's anything by the time we get to the end that you really did want to say something about, we haven't mentioned it, then please feel free to do. So if you're happy, I'll go straight to page 15 in the report, and this is around questions of engagement. And I just wonder if you could say a little bit, this is 3.1, and engagement and feedback. If you could say a little bit about what's been happening with the lockdowns and the restrictions, the virus, how that's impacted on engagement, what you're doing to try and continue to engage with the public in these difficult circumstances, and something about the independent advisory group, whether that has in fact been able to meet, and if so, how they've managed to do that. So something around engagement.
So, Commissioner, and hello to everybody. My first Public Accountability Board, so please forgive me if I make any missteps. But ultimately, the engagement and feedback during COVID has been a little bit more difficult than we normally would do, in terms of certainly no gatherings in order to do large public meetings like we may have done in the past. So a number of things that that our neighbourhood teams have done, have looked to use technology we've got already, which would be the community alert. social media and Facebook and Twitter, albeit we understand that that doesn't always reach all of our groups, and particularly you asked about some of our harder to reach groups that may not necessarily engage on those platforms. So what we have been doing is our neighbourhoods have been engaged in writing articles and being involved in locally available free press papers like Activate and Tito that go across a number of our postcodes. But actually we've also still, as you are aware, been able to patrol both on foot and in vehicles. So a lot of our engagement has still been done face to face with the public through that type of forum on foot. In terms of the IAG, that is still ongoing. It's a piece of work that is starting to have some hold. Our neighbourhood chief inspector is looking at how that is managed, and certainly has taken place, but virtually over the last year, and probably not as frequently as we would like it to do. So we'll continue to look at how we can do that. Because as I've mentioned throughout the report, I think that is an important forum for us to be able to use, particularly around some of the areas like, for example, our use of stop and search, how we manage some of our hate crime investigations, and also some of our engagement around COVID legislation and restrictions. So I don't know if that gives you sufficient assurance, Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you very much. I had a meeting the other day, a remote meeting, video call, with some residents in the Handsworth, Stradbrook and Woodhouse areas. That was specifically around some house burglary, but principally vehicle theft. That was very good. It was a lot of time. It was an hour and over an hour. Very, very well worth doing. Chief Inspector Helen Lewis joins on the call. That's another opportunity for us to engage, which probably we wouldn't have thought about if it hadn't been for coronavirus. But they clearly can't do it all the time with everybody who wants to pop up and talk to you. But it is just another avenue.
And that's right, and you all know also that some of our teams have been using Facebook, so there's been virtual meetings and I know that certainly from the residents that you spoke to with Helen on Friday, that neighbourhood inspector has done some of those virtual forums and question and answer sessions. So we certainly try to be available. It's just can't do it in the same public face-to-face meetings that we might have traditionally done so. But I think that is giving us a different forum and a different way to engage with communities, which can be positive, actually.
Absolutely. Thank you. Can I take you to page 17, I think it is? Let me just have a quick turn the page. Page 16.
Yeah.
This is crime levels is the main heading. And I wonder if you could just say something around violent crime, the work of the armed crime team and the other teams. You seem to have had some success here, because we've had CAB meetings in the past where a lot of time has been taken up with the use of weapon shootings in Armberthorne and elsewhere in the city. You seem to be having some success in cracking down on these people and perhaps getting weapons off the street. I think it'd be reassuring to people to just have something about that, Shelley.
So the armed crime team is led by Superintendent Ian Prophet. It works alongside our 45 teams, those that deal with organised crime in Sheffield. They particularly are looking at armed criminality within Sheffield and any discharges. The two work very much hand in hand, but also with our neighbourhood team. So there's a strong cross-team footprint, albeit the armed crime team take primacy around any of those discharges that have occurred. And you're right, there has been some really good work that has led to a reduction in the number of discharges that have occurred, particularly in the two areas that the team have focused on. So you may have heard about a number of discharges that took place in the Arbourthorne area over June and July last year. and certainly since engagement with the armed crime team and the 45 teams, they certainly made a number of arrests, 15 in total. They recovered a number of firearms, and we hadn't seen an incident there since September last year. That requires constant vigilance, to be fair, and review of intelligence and management of those investigations. But they've also been fairly successful in the Aberdale and Nether Edge area, where we also had a number of firearms discharges. In fact, I think I might have got that mixed up. In the Arbourthorne, we've had 4 people charged with conspiracy to murder, and no discharges since August. In Aberdale and Nether Edge, we've made 15 arrests, recovered the firearms, and the last incident in September. So actually, they are seeing some success. That will always need to be working hand in hand with our 45 teams, and ultimately they are looking at any relevant intelligence or any other actionable evidence that would allow us to deal with the main people that we see coming through the organised crime groups. I think the other thing to mention in terms of the armed crime team is they are co-located with our 45 teams. They do work hand in hand together. So it has been a really successful team and a successful, some good results, I should say, for Sheffield. The one thing I should say in terms of the discharges that they deal with is that they can be really very alarming for our public in Sheffield, but we are aware that those are discharges between rival groups. So thankfully, rarely our members of the public would get caught up in that criminality. But even so, it's really important that we keep the pressure on those organised groups because that ultimately we don't want the public to come to harm.
And it would be true to say,
like he wants to speak.
Yeah, I'll let Tim in a half tick, but it'd be true to say that serious violence is serious violence, but most of it is not weapons violence, is it? That's pretty rare, isn't it, the use of weapons?
We can see the use of weapons. In terms of serious violence that we're talking about here, that the armed crime team are tackling, that is the most serious type of violence. But in general, in large groups within the community, that's not the sort of violence that we're needing to tackle, and it is in relation to organised groups rather than in any other way, I should say.
Tim, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Commissioner, I just want you to be reassured, and the public as well, that we don't just tackle armed criminality from the perspective of reacting to shootings once they've taken place. We are very, very proactive. And a case that certainly featured heavily in the media at the back end of last week was just an example of one of those, Operation Erbium, which is a 2.5-year investigation that's now finally concluded, with South Yorkshire Police working in cooperation with the Regional Organised Crime Unit and the National Crime Agency to go after and proactively target those people where we've got intelligence that they're actually involved in the supply of firearms and the supply of Class A drugs. And that was one such example. These are incredibly complex, involved investigations that require a huge amount of work. This is the sort of work the public don't see because it's often covert in nature. But the magnitude of the firearms that particular gang were supplying around the South Yorkshire and Sheffield area, including automatic weapons, is absolutely staggering. And I've no doubt by taking that gang out and putting them in prison, which is where they need to be, that's actually prevented a number of shootings. And I'm absolutely sure that there'd be people alive today who wouldn't be had those sorts of investigations not taken place. And Arslan Hussain, who was the leader of that gang, he got 27.5 years in prison, 19 years for the firearms, and 8.5 years for the drugs to run consecutively, which is a staggering sentence and indicates just the seriousness of of the criminals that they're involved in.
Now, I noticed that they were very big sentences, and hopefully that does send a big message out to those gangs. And a case where the courts are very much, we sometimes feel the courts could do more, but in this instance, it looks as if that was a really exemplary sentence that was handed out there. Thank you. On to page 17, Shelley, if I can, and that's around fraud. And again, I just wonder if you could say something around that and what's been happening again with the coronavirus and whether you've been able to do any preventative work.
In terms of fraud, Commissioner, this really is led nationally by the National Fraud Investigation Branch, and there is a specialist team centrally in South Yorkshire, the Fraud Crime Team, that coordinates our responses that come from NFIB. So in terms of any work that we are doing, certainly there is messaging that we can do if we hear of any types of fraud that are circulating around the communities, to ensure through our neighbourhood teams that we are making and alerting people to those possibilities of the fraud. But we also continue where we've got victims that are identified as having been subject of fraud, to continue through our neighbourhood teams to do a fraud risk assessment with those individuals and look at what support and safeguarding and preventative activity we can put in place.
Yeah. Do you work with trading standards around this?
We can do. I haven't got any specific information or instances that I can give you around that, but certainly that would be one group of people that would assist in cases like that.
It might be something I chase up through the office. I don't know whether Sharon is on the... yes, I think you are, Sharon Baldwin from my office. We did fund some telephones, didn't we, or devices for telephones to help certain people cut out fraudulent calls. Sharon, are you able to say anything about that?
Hello, Alan. Yes, we did. It's probably going back into 2018-19 funding. We funded a number of phones, which is it's basically a call blocking device, particularly for the vulnerable victims, so the elderly and some victims that were suffering from dementia, and it's been a real success.
Are they still available?
I'm not sure what the situation is in terms of availability. I know.
Okay. Well, it might be something we can follow up.
I think there's a particular spot within Force that links in with our commissioning team, so we just need to follow that up with him. Thanks
very much. Can I take you to page 19, Shelley? This is domestic abuse, and you've obviously got your specialist teams. An awful lot has been going on, and we're all very concerned about what might happen to victims during the first lockdown, and then we had a second lockdown. Now we're into a third lockdown. Again, if you could just say a little bit around how we're reacting there. Something about the training that officers get, because I think there's been a real stepping up of that, hasn't there?
Yes, Commissioner. Prior to coming to Sheffield, I was, as you'll be aware, the Force Domestic Abuse Lead. And so from that perspective, I was engaged with the Violence Reduction Unit in order to bring DA matters, domestic abuse matters training into South Yorkshire. That is training that all of our frontline response staff will go on over the net. Well, it started the rollout in September through to March. As you can imagine, we've had to ensure we can do that in a COVID secure way, but vitally important training for our officers and staff that is delivered in conjunction with Safe Lives, the charity. Really excellent training that talks really to how it feels to be a victim and at what points that they will look to policing to ask for support and help. So far, the feedback we've received of that has been really very positive, and as you can imagine, now that I'm in Sheffield, I'm ensuring that as many of our officers attend that training as possible, highlight how we can look at ensuring that we gather good evidence that would allow us to think about criminal justice outcomes, even where the victim themselves doesn't feel that they are able to complain. So that training is ongoing. We have a fairly large domestic abuse team at the moment. They are looking at how they can best investigate all offences of domestic abuse, find the right safeguarding that would support and keep our victims safe, and also look for the best outcomes, which of course aren't always criminal justice outcomes, but we may use other orders and other methods to keep those people safe, including working with the domestic abuse services across the city.
And we're all watching now the domestic abuse bill make its way through Parliament. I think the second reading in the House of Lords began in the other day, so that will be that'll strengthen your arm as well as all the other agencies as well, and make the position of victims much better, of course. But
yeah, absolutely, I agree. I'm quite looking forward to one aspect of that bill, which is the expansion of domestic violence protection notices to a wider power of a domestic abuse protection notice and order. I think that has the capacity to support many more victims, and certainly something that from a DA lead point of view I'd be interested in, and Sheffield, because we'd have that opportunity to protect more victims. But clearly we've got to wait for the legislation to be enacted.
Yeah, thank you. If you can cast your eye down page 19 towards the bottom there, you write, it's quite a stark sentence. This is county lines now. Sheffield accounts for 90% of South Yorkshire county lines, so that's a big caseload for you in Sheffield. I just wonder if you could say again something around what's happening to, this is where young people are getting groomed and drawn into crime. I just wonder what you think is happening during lockdowns with this. I know what you say about not being able to do stuff in hotels, but are there any other locations where young people are being groomed, drawn in, or is it all online, or quite what's going on?
In terms of county lines, this is about exporting and importing and using young people in order to transport drugs into and out of the county, which can still occur during lockdown because we're still seeing vehicle traffic, we're still seeing public transport. I suppose what I would say in terms of lockdown, and certainly lockdown where the schools are no longer in, that does mean that we can see a reduction in the amount of intelligence and information that we have. But one of the things that we are alive to when we're dealing with any reports of children that may be missing from home, or young people that are missing from where they should be, certainly our officers are trained to spot the signs, and we review those missing episodes to see whether or not we might have missed any intelligence or information that would suggest that young person might be being exploited criminally either or through the county lines regime.
Okay, thank you. Can I jump you to page 23 for quite a few pages further on to mental health issues? And again, the impact of coronavirus. Can you say anything about what might have happened during the Christmas period around mental health issues that either you were encountering as a force or the impact on your officers, of course?
Well, certainly the data I talk in here talks to data that is up to September, so I haven't got any accurate data around December, but what I can, I suppose what it would appear from looking at the data to September is that there has been an increase in the number of people that we've detained under the mental health powers. And I suppose I've drawn a correlation, whether it's true to do so or not, that might suggest that that is linked to COVID and coronavirus. And certainly that is something that has been reported in public forums and in the news, isn't it, about people suffering more with mental health as a result of the isolation that the lockdowns bring. So from that perspective, our officers have dealt with a fairly large number of people that may be presenting in mental health crisis. For us, that might manifest its way in people that are reported missing by their loved ones, that are reported as being suicidal, and generally where we would tend to find those people in the public place for their safety and for their assessment, we might well detain them under the Mental Health Act. So I think from what we can see and what the numbers, coronavirus may have been a driver for that increase in mental health, which of course then does have an impact on our police officer demand to be able to deal sensitively with those people until mental health services can take responsibility for them.
Thank you. I'm going to page 25, and this is around organised crime groups. We've already said something around that now. I just wondered if you could add a little bit about whether you're getting public support in these areas where there are OCGs operating, or whether that's still an issue.
I suppose I'll take you back then to at the start of the report that talks about us starting now to have a really thriving and larger neighbourhood footprint within Sheffield now. So we've got 15 sergeant-led teams, just over 100 police officers within our neighbourhood footprint, and certainly part of their role is to obtain that community intelligence and community engagement. So I think from that perspective, our neighbourhoods are involved in the policing of those organised crime groups, because they are the ones within their community that are gaining that intelligence that might come from there. And I think that thriving neighbourhood footprint will really pay some dividends as we continue to look at how we manage and tackle organised criminality.
So the number of police officers you've got in neighbourhood teams has increased, and the number of teams has increased. Have you? Is that the end of the road, so to speak? Have you got now the operating model for Sheffield, or are you still looking to increase the number of teams?
We're certainly, I can see Mr. Forber probably wants to speak, we're certainly moving towards it, and we continue to develop, but I should imagine that he's going to say we see that neighbourhood footprint as being really very important, and certainly we do within Sheffield. Sir, did you want to speak?
Yeah, what I just add, Alan, is that as a result of the PCSO review, you will recall that we've reduced the number of PCSOs and increased the number of police officers, and that's been as one's gone down, we've created the police officer posts as we've gone along. We will create the final 40 police officer posts that are distributed around the force in neighbourhood teams on the 1st of February of this year, and that then will leave us with a complete neighbourhood policing team right across the force, across all 4 districts. And very much now our drive towards consistency in neighbourhood teams across the district. So that means 3 things really: properly structured engagement with local communities at a local level, so we find out what local people want from their team, we make sure that we do something about it and feed it back to them. Targeted activity, actually having a menu of tactics that neighbourhood teams can pick from and apply using an evidence base to specific problems in their areas, and structured problem solving. I know when I talk in the next report a little bit, I may just talk a little bit about some of the burglary problem solving work we've done and the impacts of that. But our drive in the next 6 months really around neighbourhood policing is as new officers start to filter into the force, to fill those posts up. As I say, the number of posts in neighbourhoods will be complete by the 31st of March. It's actually by the 1st of February, but we hope to have many of those officers actually in those posts by the 31st of March. And we've got an exciting programme of training for our neighbourhood officers that's been accredited by Skills for Justice, that's going to be rolled out over the early part of this year, COVID permitting, which obviously presents some challenges with that. But to make sure that the officers who are fulfilling this role have access to the very best training and education in terms of problem solving, so they can discharge that role in an exemplary way. So we're really pleased with where we are, neighbourhood policing, and if I can contrast it back to where position we were in 4 years ago, we're really confident that we've got an operating model now that will allow us to continue to build on the success that we've had. But it's important that we do that, and it's important that we have finances in place to do that, that we continue to be supported by central government to do that, because this is such an important part of policing for the public. This is, I talked a little while ago about the part of policing that the public don't see, that covert element of policing, which is equally as important. What matters most to the public is that visible, engaged local policing in the local community. We're absolutely determined that that will be as good in South Yorkshire as it is anywhere in the country.
Thank you. We may return to that then in your report. The final thing, not the final thing, but the last one, I think, thing, Shelley, that I got is on page 26. The city centre team in particular. I've not had as many people onto the office or to me personally about rough sleepers this year as I've had in the past. That there are those who are concerned, though, about rough sleepers, either those who are offering a very pejorative sort of point of view, or those who are concerned about them and anxious about their welfare. Could you just say something about rough sleepers, where you think we're at the moment in Sheffield?
Well, you will know that we have PCSO Steve Hart, who is dedicated to dealing with rough sleepers within the city centre. He's engaged with a number of charities, but also with the local authority, and working hard to identify anyone that is sleeping rough and look to finding some long-term solutions. I know that he's had some considerable success working with partners recently to find stable housing for a number of those people that have been vulnerable and that have had multiple complex needs and tended to be drug dependent as well. So he will continue that work, and we see that as being a really important theme of work within the city centre.
So he's still around then. I haven't seen him for a bit, but that's partly because I'm not going into the central town as much as I did at the time. But that's good news.
Yeah, he stays in role, and certainly, I think a number of people with whom he engaged, those people that are homeless that he engages, he's got a really good knack to work long term with people, to actually convince them to engage with services. So we're really pleased that he continues to work in the city centre.
Good, thank you. On page 27, bringing offenders to justice. This might be for you, Tim, I don't know. New officers, you've got a lot of new officers coming in now, and I just wondered if you could say a word around that, because obviously they've got to be got up to speed, haven't they? And that must be an issue for you.
I think it's an opportunity, to be honest, Commissioner, because the young people that have been recruited are really high calibre. They're really very enthusiastic. You're right in saying, I think I mention it later on, it is going to be one of our challenges due to the numbers, but a challenge to celebrate. It will just take a little while for their capacity and resilience to be the same as it would for an officer that's got a number of years service and is very experienced. But we're seeing it as a positive challenge.
Perhaps if I just have a few words. Absolutely, Commissioner. Our training school is full to capacity now, and we've actually had to put temporary buildings up there to accommodate the additional officers that are starting. They continue to flow into the organisation. But what I should say from the outset is we're in a competition with every other force in the country to try and recruit people, and wherever you go now, there's very aggressive recruitment campaigns undertaken by every force. We are really pleased with the calibre of recruit that we seem to be attracting at the moment, and I and other members of the Chief Officer team, we actually partake ourselves in interviewing new recruits on occasions, just to touch base with it and make sure that the people that we are getting are suitable to enhance and continue to build the reputation of the force and provide the sort of service that we want our communities to receive. It's an interesting time as well, because the method of training police officers has changed. Obviously, we're tied into a national programme, the Police Education Qualifications Framework, has come into being at the back end of last year, which makes now policing a degree profession. So people either join us with a degree, and if they don't join us with a degree as a degree holder, they join us as a high-level apprentice and spend a 3-year probationary period, at the conclusion of which they are awarded a degree in policing studies. And as part of that training programme now, they spend more time in different areas of policing to make them more rounded police officers. Hitherto, if I'm honest, it's probably not changed that much since I joined the police 20 odd years ago, that people tended to become part of a response team. Start off with, and it was only once they got 2 years or maybe a bit longer in that they started to branch out into other areas, be it neighbourhoods or investigation. Officers throughout the 3-year training programme now spend a period of time in response policing, in neighbourhoods, in investigation. And we believe that that will make a more well-rounded officer, better able to deal with the more complex issues that policing presents these days. So in summary, yeah, we're really confident about the future. Still remains some significant challenges, particularly in relation to detectives. Like every force, we have a shortage of detectives. We've got a fast-track detective programme now where we've got people very quickly going into the CID. We're recruiting people through Detective Now, which is a national programme where people get recruited directly into the force as a detective, and we've got a number of people joining on that programme in the next couple of months. So we're generally very enthusiastic. It presents a huge opportunity. It's not without its challenges, but absolutely, we do believe that the force with enhanced numbers will be able to continue to build on the progress that we've made over the last 3 to 4 years and really build one of the most outstanding police forces in the country.
I was going to say, you talk about competition, but this is South Yorkshire Police we're talking about here, Tim, so there shouldn't be any argument around competition there. But and of course, we've got Thomas Bright on the call. I won't embarrass him by asking him to reveal himself, but he's one of your fast-track detectives, so I hope we haven't put him off.
Tom's an example of someone who's been selected for the national fast-track programme, Constable to Inspector. So Tom joined us a couple of years ago, a young officer, and goes through a very demanding national selection process. So demanding is it? I mean, I interview any candidate that we're going to send forward to the National Assessment Centre personally. We've had, I think, 2 or 3 people successfully get onto that programme, maybe 4 actually, during the time that I've been in the force. So it is a very exclusive programme, but we're very keen to make sure that where we've got people who are especially talented, that we identify them and make sure that their careers are developed. They're going to be the future chief officers, the chief officers of the future.
I'm glad to hear it. Very good. I'll talk to him separately rather than embarrass him now, as they say. But thank you very much for that. My last comment is on page 28, Shelley, which is around hate crime, and people will pick this up in the report. You're reporting a big fall, October to November, I think it was, in hate crime, and there will be people who come to me and say that cannot be true, that cannot possibly be true. I mean, I guess if you look at the long term, over the longer period, it probably isn't true that there's been a big fall, but could you just say a little bit around hate crime?
Yes, and I allude to it in the report. It, in some ways, possibly through lockdown and the fact that fewer people are out in the public, that may be something that accounts for the fact that we have seen some reductions in hate crime. However, like I mentioned, it is for us, we really need to understand the reasons that may fall, because I don't want that to be because victims don't feel that they can come forward. I just want to reassure you and any member of the public that we take hate crime really seriously. From our perspective in Sheffield, you've already mentioned what our neighbourhood chief inspector from your meeting last week. She is now involved in being our hate crime lead. We ensure that all of the reports of hate crime are scrutinised, first of all, so that we can ensure that we give the best possible service to those victims that are reporting, and also look for every opportunity to identify who the offender would be and bring those to justice. And also, I think it's a really important how those victims feel when we speak to them afterwards in terms of their satisfaction. So we have seen, certainly since Helen has been leading and working with the hate crime coordinator, we just not long since appointed a new one that's working in the partnership. We're starting to see some improvements in certainly how our victims feel, and we're hoping that we can continue that trajectory. But certainly we've got a thriving hate crime priority group that works within the community safety partnership, and they will be looking to ensure that we can encourage people to report. We need to know so that we can understand what the issues are and make people feel safe.
Thank you very much. And we've got a report from the IEP towards the end of the meeting, and I'll give Anne McCaskill notice now that I will ask her to say a little bit about hate crime from the perspective of the IEP. Thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you for the report. Was there anything that you felt that you wanted to say, Charlotte, that you haven't been able to do? You don't have to.
No, I think I'm happy with that. One thing that I've just checked on though to confirm for you is in page 4 that address is a local authority property, in case that was something that you needed to know. And the intention is for our page 4 team and the new community team that, from Sheffield City Council to work quite closely together there. I think that will do for me. Thank you.
No, that's fine. No, I knew that they were looking for premises as well, and it just seemed odd that we weren't looking for the same premises. So that solves that problem here. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. Well, moving on in the agenda then, forced performance. We're on to item 11. Tim, this is yourself, and I'll do the same with your report if I may. So if I can take you immediately to page 34 of the report. Sorry, this is around tackling crime and antisocial behaviour. It's part of the police and crime plan. It's one of our priorities. So on page 34, this is, yes, if you could say something around ORA, this is at 3.4, organisational risk assessment. I just was trying to get my head around whether this is something that all forces do, or whether this is specific to South Yorkshire, or whether all forces do something like it, and this is South Yorkshire's version of it. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I'm sure all forces do something like this. This is an assessment, in essence, us taking a long, hard look at demand, looking at a range of data, both in terms of our internal data and external data, to try and understand what will demand be like in the future. Because that's particularly when we've got an opportunity where the force is growing. You know, this isn't just simply about getting an extra 700 officers through the door and randomly divvying them up between 4 districts and saying, well, that's fine. You know, we've talked today about the issues with armed criminality. We've talked about domestic violence. We've talked on other occasions about child protection and making sure that we've got sufficient resources to deal with that. You know, we've talked about the need to maintain neighbourhood policing. So it's about sitting back and actually just putting some science behind demand and coming up with a predictive model to try and decide where we're going to place our resources. And that leads into our strategic planning process. So as we decide when and where, you know, we need extra resources, for example, the armed crime team, you know, we created that because we saw demand around armed criminality is not going to go away. It's something that we need specialist resources to deal with. Over the course of the next 12 months, we will have, you know, greater specialist firearms capability to be able to support that team. And that's just one example. And there are many, but all forces have a structured approach to understanding demand, because that informs the strategic planning process.
Yes. What I was getting at is it possible to compare, therefore, what South Yorkshire is doing with other forces, or is that just not possible because their assumptions are very different, or their methodology is different?
I think that you can, and HMIC and the value for money profiles try to draw a distinction between forces in terms of, how many resources have forces got in particular areas of business. But I think, every force is different in terms of its population, in terms of the particular issues, because of the geography. And so often you can try and draw comparisons with other forces, but the context is always slightly different. So it's important that we've got a planning tool that we have got some confidence in. We report on that. It links very much into the force management statement, which we have to publish to HMIC. It's really, really important that it supports the development of that investable policing model that we have here in South Yorkshire now, of neighbourhood policing, supported by investigation, supported by response, and all the different elements of that includes.
Yeah, thank you. On page 35, this is 3.16, you talk about agile working. Again, if you could say a word around that, given the fact that agile working may mean something different now, having had coronavirus and everybody, well, not everybody, but large numbers of people working from home for the first time, whether that's affected your thinking and whether there are any preliminary thoughts that you've got around that?
Well, the fact that we're sat here having this meeting in this format, I suppose, is a prime illustration for all concerned as to how the world has changed in the last 12 months. But we've been keen on making our workforce more productive. You can call it agile working, but we prefer to call it smarter ways of working. We want to make all our staff more productive. And historically, police officers particularly, as we've become more dependent on information technology, I think historically there's never been the investment in mobile technology that perhaps there should have been 15 years ago. So we developed a situation where I've always called it police officers on an elastic band that go out to a job but have to come back to the police station to either report on something or to find out something, information. And we'd already taken the decision as a force pre-COVID to make a significant investment in agile technology to drastically reduce that particular phenomenon and make our officers more productive. So we invested over £650,000 in laptops for all our investigators across the force to mean that they could go out, undertake investigation, access all force systems via a 4G network, and effectively do everything that they could do in a police station whilst out in the field. Running alongside that, we've equipped every single frontline uniform officer with a new smartphone. The smartphones we were using 3 years ago were previous generation technology and not fit for purpose. Every officer in South Yorkshire now has access to a smartphone, which has various apps on it that allow them to link into force systems. And all officers are equipped with a laptop computer, just like the one I'm talking to you on now, which again provides access to all force systems. So we're monitoring that. We have business benefits measurements in place to make sure that we are getting more out of our officers, more time spent outside, being visible to the public, and dealing with more in a single shift. And that's the objective, to make people more productive. And that work was already underway. In fact, the rollout had just finished just as COVID started to hit. Post-COVID, what we have concentrated on is enabling more of our support workforce. We obviously have a significant number of police staff at the organisation who, do all those functions such as finance, HR, running our estates, running our fleets, all those functions that a police force needs to operate effectively. What we're doing now is looking at all of those different departments to see how we can make colleagues who work there more agile. The benefits in the long term, and I think that I suppose the holy grail is to look at how do we reduce some of the buildings that house those support functions. The public get very, very concerned about police stations, and rightly so. They want local police stations in the local area, and you will know that we've reopened a number of police stations have started to grow. But I don't hear the public too concerned about where we host our HR departments or where our estates people work from or where our IT is hosted. And what we hope in the long term is that by properly equipping the workforce, we can have people working in smaller premises in a more agile way that will allow us to actually have less buildings, but less of those buildings that effectively don't touch the operation and delivery of police. So that's where we want to get to.
Okay. Thank you. I'm on page 36 now, Tim. And I wondered if you could say something around the wider criminal justice system, the involvement with the courts that we have through the local criminal justice board. We've got the judge coming this week, the recorder, to talk about the courts and what's happening there. But we've been trying to help the courts with some modelling of demands for them, and they want that to continue. Could you just say a little word around that and where we're at with that?
Well, I think just to set it in context for any member of the public and the press, the police obviously do not operate in isolation, and we have key stakeholders aside from the role that we have, particularly with the local authority in terms of community safety. In terms of the criminal justice system, we have key relationships with the Crown Prosecution Service and the Courts and Tribunal Service, and it's vitally important that when we arrest people and we put them before the courts, there's a seamless process that brings that person to justice in a timely fashion. And there's still a lot of truth in the saying, justice delayed is justice denied. Victims of crime deserve to see someone be brought to justice in a timely fashion. COVID has introduced some significant challenges with that, and earlier on in the pandemic, we have particular issues with backlogs in courts. They have ameliorated to some degree, and particularly so in the Crown Court. The Crown Courts have worked really hard to get trials up and running. We've had some very complex trials start to run again in the Crown Court, but we continue to have challenges getting prisoners into the Magistrates' Court. Through the local Criminal Justice Board, with your office and supported by some of our analytical capability in the force, and working with partners, we've managed to develop a model, a predictive model that can actually follow the flow of prisoners and people through the criminal justice system. So eventually what we hope it will be able to do is say is that if we're arresting X number of people, when you look at attrition rates at different stages of the system, some people will drop out because we don't take any further action because there isn't the evidence. Some will drop out because we have an out-of-court disposal, such as restorative justice or a caution. But some will go through to the court, and some will go through to the Crown Court because it's a more serious offence. And what we want to do with our colleagues in the CPS and the court service is develop a model that actually can demonstrate that flow and effectively say, if you've got X number of prisoners going into the criminal justice system from South Yorkshire Police, this will mean X in terms of sitting days in the Crown Court, Y in terms of sitting days in the Magistrates' Court. This is what you'll need in terms of cell capacity. And we're really anxious to continue to develop that work. It's certainly it's better than anything that I've certainly been made aware of within local criminal justice boards throughout the country. So, as you say, the judge comes to the next criminal justice board, and no doubt we'll discuss it more within that forum.
Thank you very much. Because of the time, I'm going to take you to page 39, and this is around residential burglaries, because that is an issue that is very much something that the public get onto me about. Really, it's an intrusive crime, and it disturbs people, the individuals who are burgled, and the neighbourhoods in which they happen. And I mentioned at the beginning the meeting I had with people from Stradbroke, Woodhouse and Handsworth in Sheffield, but it's a general issue across the force. And we're an outlier. South Yorkshire is an outlier when it comes to residential burglary. So I just wonder if you could say something of reassurance around that. I was particularly interested in the Handsworth, Stradbroke and Woodhouse case as to why Operation Shield hadn't been rolled out there, Smart Water and all of that. Perhaps you could say a word around that as well.
Yeah. I mean, some of the smart water rollout has been delayed this year just because of some of the issues around COVID and going into people's homes. So that has delayed things in terms of the ongoing rollout this year. Let me talk about burglary more widely. And first of all, let me reassure yourself and the public, take it deadly seriously. The idea that someone could break into someone's home, it's a crime that has real impacts, both on people's often on the livelihood, but certainly on in terms of the sense of personal safety. So our neighbourhood teams are working hard to prevent burglary. Some of the basics we've really sharpened up in recent times. So each neighbourhood has dedicated burglary patrol plans. They have a number of offenders that they concentrate on managing. Many of those are part of our integrated offender management cohort, where we work with other agencies to manage those offenders and reduce their offending behaviour. Closely monitor the deployment of our forensic resources. It is a fact when people find their houses or their homes or their lockups burgled. This is so often a crime that's committed when there are no witnesses, because burglars don't operate when someone's watching them break in. So very often, they're solved by two things really: CCTV at the scene or the deployment of forensic resources. So we closely monitor the deployment of our forensic teams in terms of how many addresses that we go to as a proportion of overall burglaries, when they find an identification that comes on it, and how often that leads into the actual arrest of an individual. We closely monitor any outstanding suspects to make sure that they're arrested as soon as possible. And an area that we've recently placed a lot of emphasis on is shoe marks. The number of people who are coming into the custody suite and not having shoe marks taken was particularly low. Going back a couple of months, that's increased by about 80% over recent months. And we've recently got a new digital scanner that allows us to manage those forensic products in a much more efficient way now. So we can scan someone's footwear, and if that matches to a footmark found at a crime scene, very quickly we'll be able to identify who the offender is and do something about it. We continue to operate, to roll out Operation Shield, but as I say to you, that has been a little bit more difficult and tricky just because of the need to go into people's homes, some of the COVID issues over the summer. But one thing we have done, which I did want to talk about, and I alluded it to before, was problem solving. Problem solving is the bedrock, or one of the key bedrocks of neighbourhood policing. And as part of the work led by Paul Ferguson, who's Chief Inspector at Barnsley, we selected, I think it was 12 areas around the force, and we got some academic support to talk about these particular areas of burglary. So there's 16 areas. There's 3 in Barnsley, 3 in Rotherham, 4 in Doncaster, and 6 in Sheffield. And these are the communities that have been most harmed consistently for burglary. And we've got in, I'll just give you the names actually, Commissioner. We've got in Dr. Stuart Kirby and colleagues to look at, from an academic perspective, the development of bespoke problem-solving plans for each of those areas. And that was looking at things like ANPR, the additional finance around CCTV and lighting, even a letter drop to people reminding them of the need to take crime prevention advice. In Doncaster, we looked at alligating, for example, and more door-to-door engagement to stimulate people to secure their properties. And what we found as a result of that work, if you compare October and December 2019 to October and December 2020, across the force there was a 20% reduction in burglary across that period. Well, in these particular areas, that reduction was 31% less. So, whilst, and we certainly would not seek to deny, COVID has had a significant reduction effect on residential burglary because more people are at home all day long. Across the force, it's reduced by 20%, but in these particular areas, it's reduced by a further 10%, which tends to indicate some of what we've done in these areas of work. That's something, as we continue to invest in our neighbourhood policing teams, as we develop that level of consistency across the force, I'd like to see that approach rolling out to more areas.
Oh, that's very good. It's very good news and reassuring to people because, as I say, South Yorkshire is, for some reason I don't totally understand, we do seem to have more burglars here than some other parts of the country, and it does really impact, as you say, on individuals and their communities. Can I take you to page 42? You touched on this, integrated offender management, and again, I wonder if you could just say something by way of reassurance about how this is all being managed, and particularly, again, during coronavirus, perhaps?
Yeah, I can. So integrated offender management is where we work with, principally probation, but other agencies as well, to make sure that where we've got someone who is either a prolific offender or at risk of being a prolific offender, that collectively we put that support around them to prevent that offending behaviour. So, that could be about drug support, could be support with addiction, support with employment, but often it's about a combination of those things, bringing an element of stability to people's lives that allows them to start moving forward without resorting to crime. On occasions, it's about arresting them and putting them in prison if all those things fail. It's about partner agencies working together, sharing information to make sure that we've got the best possible opportunity to stop someone who's a prolific offender continuing to wreak misery on the communities of South Yorkshire. So in paragraph 3.53, there's just a number of examples in there where we've started to see some elements of success. So you see that someone who's a burglar, seriously critical of crime, nominal, as it says in the report, but ultimately that's someone who goes out and burgles people's houses. Has completed a course around Forging Ahead, which is about getting people into employment, and a college course. And you accompany that with things around stability, around addiction, you start to see a change in behaviour. And what I'd say in terms of particularly burglary, my experience over many years is most people who commit burglary tend to commit a lot of burglary. You've got a small number of offenders committing an awful lot of offending. It tends to be driven, not exclusively, tends to be driven by addiction, and tends to be driven by someone with a totally chaotic lifestyle. They're the most frequent features that you see amongst these offenders. So if you can get to that and work with partners, and this is not a softly approach, because there's always the opportunity there if someone is continuing to offend to get arrested and put before the court. There's an opportunity, particularly if people are coming out of prison, to be able to work with them, collectively work with them to prevent them offending again. So that's what we do. That's what integrated offender management is all about. And we have had some measure of success with it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm on to page, 45. Just a quick comment. Towards the bottom of the page, 3.71, you mentioned these bite-sized videos that you're making to show to officers about aspects of policing. I just wonder whether that's something we could make a contribution to with victim support services, bite-sized videos around that, which might be of use to officers, information.
So, this has come about as a result of our drive to improve standards of investigation. We want to improve the service we provide to victims. We want to improve the number of people that are brought justice. Some of that is about getting the basics of investigation right. Some of that is about issues like disclosure, where we have to disclose all the material gathered during the investigation in a very structured way to make sure that any subsequent trials are fair and that the defence teams have access to any information that might undermine the prosecution case. So that's just one example. These issues are complex, and often if our officers aren't doing it if they're not undertaking these things very often, sometimes they need a reference point to go back to. So we're now developing a series of short videos that officers can access from a mobile device. If they're not sure of something, or if they want to undertake a bit of continuing professional development themselves, there'll be a library there for them to be able to access. And absolutely, if we can get other agencies talking about what they do, how to contact victim support, I'm more than happy to be able to include that as part of a bank, a library of resources that are available to officers.
Great, thank you very much, Tim. I think that's all the, looking at the time as well, I think that's everything I wanted to ask about. Was there anything on the report that you felt I've missed most of it, but do you know what I mean? Is there something you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, I think, Commissioner, I just want to re-emphasise the importance of continuing to develop neighbourhood policing. I've been in a local policing role since last April now. I'm very lucky in terms of the structure and our destination and our roadmap towards an effective neighbourhood policing structure was put in place before I undertook this role. But delivering consistency and maintaining those numbers, both for police officers and PCSOs, is absolutely vital going forward. We've got this really exciting training programme. It's going to roll out over the course of the next few months that I genuinely believe will give us a cohort of neighbourhood police officers that are better equipped to undertake that preventative problem-solving policing in the community than anywhere in the country. And that's really, really dependent on the continued growth of the force to make sure that we can develop those areas that support neighbourhood policing. So things like the development of an armed crime team, things like the development of a new firearms team, the continued development of a response function. These are absolutely vital to make sure that neighbourhood policing is left alone and ring-fenced to deal with those issues that matter most to the community. So I just wanted to stress that, really. It's a really exciting time for South Yorkshire Police when we've got the upcoming, and we really are absolutely committed to developing a neighbourhood policing structure that the public and both the force can have pride in.
Thank you very much. I think your own enthusiasm for this and getting it right and comes across, and that's really good and reassuring in itself. So thank you very much, Tim. That was item, lost my way here, that was item 11, wasn't it? We're on to Chief Executive Reports, and that's item 12. Strategic Planning and Budget Setting. Michelle, are you introducing this?
Yes, Commissioner, I'll start and then I'll bring Sophie in to deal with the financial and budget setting aspects, and then potentially Fiona might want to say something in relation to the public consultation that's ongoing at the moment. So, Commissioner. Yes. Thank you, Commissioner. So this report has been a standing item at the last few public accountability boards in relation to progress with the twin track that is your strategic planning process that's undertaken annually. The twin track being both the budget setting, but what comes before that is the ensuring that the resources and the financial envelope match the resources, the demand that's been analysed by the Chief Constable, the policing need in South Yorkshire. So in relation to the first part, paragraph 3.4 of the report talks about last year being different in planning terms in arriving at a police and crime plan or a police and crime plan review, because it was the year of the elections, the PCC elections, which of course have been deferred because of COVID situation. So they are due to be held this May, although there are certain speculation as to whether or not they will be deferred again by a few months at least because of the current situation. So because the PCC elections were deferred, the need to issue a police and crime plan afresh was deferred as well. So what you did is last May you confirmed your 3 priorities from your police and crime plan, and then at paragraph 3.5 you also issued a document that talks about the new focus that had been necessitated by virtue of the coronavirus pandemic and the government's response to it. So those 4 bullet points talk about your and the OPCC focus since May. Paragraphs 3.6 to 3.8 then talk about your monthly planning and efficiency group, where you and force colleagues and officers in the OPCC meet to look at that planning process. The current position then, so that was really by way of background, the current position then since the last meeting, 3 things really. You have received now the Chief Constable's assessment of policing need in the county, beyond for the next year and beyond, the budget requirement, the Chief Constable's savings plans and growth plans. We've then drafting the short addendum that will be released to take us from the present time until beyond the election, when a returning or a new PCC will have the responsibility to issue a new police and crime plan. So it's a sort of a standing position released in an addendum that will be published. So we're working with Force colleagues on that. And then thirdly, the Chancellor has given a settlement announcement just before Christmas on the 17th of December, but we're yet to receive the detail of that. So paragraph 4.2, I'm going to hand over to Sophie, as your Chief Finance Officer, to talk about the implications of the announcement and the council tax flexibility afforded to PCCs nationally. And as I say, Fiona may want to talk about the public consultation results as we have them so far, because it's still ongoing. But ultimately, we're going to end up with both a budget precept proposal that we will take to the Police and Crime Panel with a supportive narrative as to why the budget is as it is and why the precept proposal from you is as it is. And that will be on the 3rd of February, the Police and Crime Panel meeting, and they then give their comments resulting from that, Commissioner. So, Sophie, would you like to come in and just talk about the Chancellor's announcement and the financial issues that have been coming out of that? Thank you.
Yes, certainly, Michelle. Yes, Commissioner. I mean, the key points are outlined in 4.2 of the report, that we had the announcement of the public sector pay freeze, except for employees that were earning less than £24,000 a year, excuse me, who would get £250 a year, and doctors and nurses were also exempt from the pay freeze. Just in terms of South Yorkshire, we have had a bit more detail now. We'll be receiving 220.8 million in Home Office grant for 21-22. That's actually a cash increase of 4.9%, but once you take uplift out and our inflation figures, it's essentially a flat cash with uplift, but then it represents a real terms reduction in funding after uplift's been excluded. So there is a reduction in funding for us. In terms of precept flexibility, police and crime commissioners are allowed to raise a precept which includes an increase of £15 next year. That would raise 76.7 million altogether in council tax in South Yorkshire, and we've been working through a number of options around precept setting. I think it is worth noting, however, that all the Home Office calculations have assumed the maximum precept will be raised wherever possible. Just based on the, obviously we've had reductions in the tax base, and due to decreases in the tax base because of COVID, there's, even after the maximum precept increase that the Home Office has included and assumed, there will still be a gap of £2.1 million from our original estimates last year, which hasn't been taken into account in direct grant funding. However, we are allowed to have some of the further funding of 670 million which has been set aside nationally for council tax support, and we should get 75% of that. So we'll still have a £500,000 loss based on maximum precept flexibility. We've got enough grant to continue with uplift, and our target numbers are 142 in South Yorkshire. They've just been confirmed, and the rest of the allocations in terms of capital, police pensions grant and council tax support and freeze grants, they've continued at a flat cash level. So as I said earlier, we're just working through the figures, looking at different precept scenarios, looking at the impact of uplift and council tax base, etc., ready to present something at the next PEG meeting, which is part of the normal strategic planning process.
Thank you. So it's a very tight settlement, a very tight year, which I guess the public don't necessarily understand. If they just hear that we're going to get lots of money to support new officers, they don't understand that actually it's a real squeeze on our finances, all of this.
Yes, it certainly is, and obviously when it comes to savings prospects, we're very limited there as well because we have to maintain the uplift numbers. So there's not an option there of reducing police numbers in any way, shape or form. So it essentially falls back onto police staff and cutting back office costs, which have already been squeezed over the last few years because of the austerity period.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to comment around this? Anyone from the force, or are we all happy?
Would you like me just to update on the public consultation?
Yes, of course. How's that going?
Yeah, so far we have, I'm trying to launch my video here, I don't know if it's working or not. So far we've had over 1,500 responses to the public consultation online. 65% of those are currently in favour of paying the sort of full amount of increase, which is up to £15 per year for Band D property. And priorities so far are the top three are coming out as visible policing, tackling resources to tackle serious crime and neighbourhood crimes. We've got another week to go on that consultation, so we're going to give that a heavy push this week, and hopefully we can at least get over 2,000 responses on that. We've also launched for tomorrow afternoon with yourself. We're offering a virtual meeting with residents to discuss the increase or proposed increase, and also their priorities on there. So we're just waiting to see what the take-up is on that, but we've publicised that via the social media as well.
Thanks, Fiona. Are there any slots on that survey where people can write in thoughts and comments as well as just ticking boxes?
There's free text availability as well, so we're just making sure that we're analysing that. So there's quite a few comments being put in on there as well, so we'll pull together a full report of those when the consultation closes.
Thanks very much. Anything else on item 12? Shall we move then to the panel reports, and JIAC, first of all, Joint Independent Audit Committee. Steve, I think I saw you on the call and we got your report. Is there anything you want to highlight for us or take us through it?
Just briefly, Commissioner, the deck was intended to highlight the work of JIAC, and as you can see, we always have updates from both yourself and the force, which are a moment in time really, but they give context to the meeting. This particular meeting concentrated on strategic concerns and how they're being managed, risk management and mitigation of risk. And then we looked at annual governance action plans to develop the force and OPCC, and we're assured that these are on track. This is followed by assurance being given that the arrangements for producing the annual governance statements are in place, and obviously we were given an update on the way that the force was dealing with policing in the pandemic and that current situation as it applied at that time. We were given an update on the budget at that time. We weren't aware of the settlement because it hadn't been announced yet, and obviously that my bit of the paper is out of date now. And finally, we took reports from internal audit and from external audit, both confirming that they continue to work well with the force, and both working pretty well on their recommendations. External audit giving us an assurance that they would try and make sure that our audits were done as early as possible, but the government hadn't yet made an announcement as to the timetable next year. That's as much as I wanted to say, really, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. Anybody else want to comment on that? If not, thank you very much, Steve. Shall we come then to item 14, which is the Independent Ethics Panel Exception Report. Anne, I think I noticed that you joined us. Whether you want to say a brief word about the panel report and perhaps say something about hate crime, wasn't it, that I mentioned earlier in the meeting?
Yes, Commissioner. This was the first meeting of the panel with the new members on it, and we're still going through an induction process with the new members. The main item was the hate crime report, and as usual we had a very detailed report from Chief Superintendent Pullman. And one of the very interesting points about the national statistics was that for the first time, the crime survey for England and Wales, the hate crime reported, levels of hate crime reported in it are now very similar to the levels of hate crime that are being reported in the Home Office Hate Crime Statistics Bulletin. Before there used to be real disparity in that there were much higher levels of hate crime reported in the crime survey of England and Wales than were the numbers reported to the police. So this is seen as a real positive because it does suggest that there's much greater confidence in the police with more hate crimes being reported to them. So I think, that's really, at a national level, is a very positive finding for them. In terms of the kind of local progress, the thing that we really did welcome was the increase in hate crime victim satisfaction. And a lot of work has been done on this in SYP. And the stats, as I say in the report, that nationally satisfaction sits approximately 15% below that of all crime victim satisfaction. But in South Yorkshire, it's only 4 to 5% below the all crime satisfaction. And yet, the all crime satisfaction rates in South Yorkshire are on a par with the national statistics. So there's been a real improvement in victim satisfaction, and we felt that the force should be commended for this, from the panel. The other main concern that we had, I had attended a meeting of the Diversity, Equality and Inclusion Board. And it was really very interesting to see the way that the force has such a coordinated plan to address diversity, equality and inclusion. But the one thing that was of concern to the independent ethics panel, around which we might want to look at it a little bit more in the long term, was this 30% increase in assault, in violence against officers, which equates to 16 officers being assaulted each week. And we were quite concerned. Well, we have been assured that there is a process in place to deal with these officers. We were just thinking as a panel, we're quite interested in looking at any long-term effects from this. Yeah. And I think that was the main things that we really wanted to report from the panel.
Thank you very much. And we do have a lot of new members, and that they are all embedding in well around. It's difficult with the virus and having to do everything remotely.
Yes, they are embedded. I mean, we're having online meetings and we're having email correspondence. At the moment, we're consulting both with your office and also with the force about continuing with lead members, but we're having a review of the areas where lead members will work, because we are aware that priorities change and it may be that there's more value added by looking at some new areas, in the longer term.
Absolutely. Thank you. Is there any comment from the force, or is everybody happy?
If I could pull in. Yeah, first of all, welcome to Anne, and I just really echo her comments on police assaults. Really, we're concerned about the propensity of people to assault our officers. This is not exclusive to South Yorkshire; it is a national issue. We have a very, very robust procedure for investigating where our officers are assaulted, and I just want to say it in public. We support them from a welfare perspective and making sure that they are. Particularly if they're injured, that they get the right sort of support, both physical and where appropriate, mental health support. But where people assault our officers, we absolutely make sure that they are investigated thoroughly by supervisory detectives, and just be absolutely clear. If people do assault our officers, that they will be prosecuted, that they will go to court, and we take an active interest in all those investigations as a command team.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Anne. Thank you very much for that. And item 16 then, PCC decisions. Michelle, is this you or Erica?
Commissioner, I can take that. That's no problem. Not much to say in relation to this. It records the decisions that you've taken since the last meeting. I don't know whether you yourself want to comment in relation to the proceeds of crime grants or the the organisations that are delivering the interventions that you have signed off?
No, just on page 66, this is the list of those organisations that are benefiting from the use of money seized, the assets seized from criminals in South Yorkshire. So I think it is important to flag it up, and we'll try and do that each time when we have a report of this nature. That, you know, fairly substantial sums of money are being ploughed back into communities. Thank you very much for the criminals, and thank you for the hard work of the force in getting this money back, these assets back. Thank you. Okay, anything else on that? Or shall we move then to item 16? The work programme, probably not a lot to say, Michelle, pages 69 to 72.
No, just a forward look. It's iterative, Alan, so we are going to be reviewing and revising as we go, but it is as on the papers for now.
Okay, thank you. Any other business? Is there anything else that anybody wants to say that we haven't covered or mentioned or touched on? Otherwise, everybody happy? So thank you very much indeed for your attendance at PAB, and our next meeting is on the 9th of February.